Hello, I'm Alan Fulton, UC Irrigation and Water Resources Advisor, working in the northern Sacramento Valley in the counties of Tehama, Glenn, Colusa, and Shasta counties. Welcome to this tutorial on using our weekly crop ET reports and thinking about them from a tree or plant perspective. In this short tutorial, I'd like to discuss why consider the tree perspective, and I'd like to try to work to develop the connection between soil moisture depletion and tree water status. So why consider the tree plant perspective? Well, after all, tree health or plant health and productivity is what we care about most. With water budgeting, which has been the subject of other tutorials, using our crop ET information or soil moisture monitoring, both are indirect indicators of crop water status. And with them, there is uncertainty about the effective crop root zone. There are also some possible benefits of using managed water deficits or irrigating less than full ET at specific crop growth stages and times. So one general benefit is better overall tree health and orchard uniformity. It's been my experience over the years that the orchards that we have the greatest non-uniformity over time are those that experience some degree of over-irrigation. This typically results in trees declining in size, eventually dying, and requiring replants. And at that point, we have a mix in the orchard and a wide range of conditions that require management. We've also experienced that with well-timed and managed water deficits, it's possible to save a little bit of water and energy savings, reducing your production costs. Now, one potential downside of deficit irrigation is salinity buildup. By definition, if we are under-irrigating, we will not be leaching salts from the root zone during the growing season. So it's possible for salinity or specific elements like boron, sodium, or chloride to build up in the soil. In the Sacramento Valley, the main issue I've run across is boron accumulation in isolated situations. And on occasion, I've run across a situation or question involving chloride accumulation. Some crop-specific benefits of well-timed or managed deficits include for almond, less hull rot going into the 4 weeks in front of harvest, more uniform hull split, which aids in the management of navel orange worm, and ultimately more uniform development of the kernel, drying down of the kernel, and leading to a more timely and efficient harvest. We definitely can prevent some delays in harvest with deficit irrigation by enhancing the maturity of the crop. And if we are able to mature the crop more uniformly and lead to a more efficient harvest, this will allow us to get the crop harvest done more efficiently and lead to earlier post-harvest irrigation, which we know can be very important to bud development for next year's crop and yield potential. In walnut, there are similar benefits. In young trees that we are training, in some instances, there's benefit to mild, well-timed deficits to help control the growth and prevent over-vigor and breakage. Also, towards the end of the season, after we have established enough canopy, we can use controlled stress to help us harden off the new shoots that we have grown this year and help us be better prepared going into the fall and winter for any early frost occurrences. In bearing orchards, we've seen that a little bit of delay in the start of irrigation season can seem to lead to better tree hardiness and resilience such that the trees reflect less tree stress at harvest time because they appear to build some hardiness and resilience to a lack of water. Whereas a tree that is irrigated aggressively, intensively, appears to acclimate itself to expect that to continue. We've also seen some benefits of mild controlled stress, reflecting itself in a higher edible kernel later in the year. In prunes, it's well documented that if we exercise some well-timed mild deficit irrigation a week or two before harvest, that we can get the benefit of increasing sugar content of the fruit, reducing the moisture content in the fruit, and reducing our drying costs at the dehydrator. So moving on from the potential benefits of a mild deficit irrigation, I'd like to talk a little bit about the connection between soil moisture depletion and tree water status. Now, we've talked in other tutorials about the different phases of soil water movement and soil water conditions. So we can certainly have, after heavy rainfalls or a significant irrigation, we can have periods of saturated soil, sometimes referred to as gravitational water. That's when the soil pores in the profile are full of water, requiring gravity to drain them and re-aerate. We reach a state called fill capacity. It's kind of that optimum condition of maximum soil moisture, yet maximum aeration. And this is what we would call fill capacity. It's at the upper level of what we would call the plant available water. We move down the continuum, and at the other extreme of the total plant available water is a very dry soil moisture condition, where the soils, if we handle them, they will not form firm balls. They will not leave moisture films on our hands. They certainly won't ribbon in the case of clays and silt soils. And at that end of the spectrum, we are approaching a level that we'd associate with wilting conditions for plants. Beyond those levels, we would have water on the soil that's really not available to the tree, called hygroscopic water, and the only way it can really be removed is by adding heat, like oven drying in a lab situation. Corresponding tree water status conditions during that saturated phase, we can certainly incur low oxygen conditions in the root zone, which is a harmful form of crop stress, and actually one that can lead to some pretty acute and sudden causes of tree death. In that plant available phase, the tree stress moves from a little to no stress, low mild crop stress, and progresses on through moderate and high crop stress. Within that plant available water, we seek to define a management threshold or a management allowable depletion to help us make decisions about irrigation management, especially when we are trying to apply water budgets or soil moisture, measurement of soil moisture depletion with sensors. And at the extreme dry end, when we're most likely definitely seeing evidence of wilt in the trees, possibly symptoms like hull shrivel and say walnut. It's at these levels that this is the other extreme of severe crop stress. It can also lead to death, but it's been in my experience, it's not nearly as acute. It's more of a chronic condition that's slow to kill a tree. And if I had to choose which that I would be most careful to try to avoid, I'd be very careful of trying to avoid the over-irrigation condition. It's very hard to recover trees that have been over-irrigated and damaged, and more feasible to recover trees that maybe have experienced more severe drought stress. So we can define management allowable depletion. Sometimes the acronym MAD is used to abbreviate it as specific or the maximum amount of soil water that an irrigation manager chooses to allow the crop to extract from the active root zone between irrigations. So in other tutorials, I've walked you through how to use your soil surveys, how to use your judgment about root zone depth to calculate total plant available water and plant available water at a 50% depletion. You can listen to those tutorials to dive into this subject at greater length. Real briefly, the plant available water depends upon the orchard soil characteristics. and it depends upon the effective root zone. So where are the roots? How deep are they, and how abundant are they? Just a last couple of slides in this tutorial, I'd like to share with you what, in some of our research plots, what we have observed in terms of the relationship between tree water status and soil moisture depletion. This set of data is from Almonds, bearing orchard growing on the west side of Tehama County in a Tehama silt loam soil. We had soil moisture monitoring that suggested strong evidence of root zone extraction to a depth of 7 feet. In this data set, we saw that tree water status begins to change drastically and consistently at a very high soil moisture depletion of about 80%. In this graphic, the horizontal axis, x-axis, is your soil moisture depletion. The vertical axis is your stem water potential measured with a pressure chamber. The general shape of the curve, we see a lot of scatter in our stem water potential measurements, even at moisture depletion levels. On average, our best fit line, it's a fairly flat line up until about 80% depletion. At that point, we see 80% depletion of our plant available soil moisture, and we see a steady decline or increase in tree water stress, steady decline in our stem water potential, as in more negative. So from this experience, it would suggest that a management allowable depletion or threshold on the order of somewhere between 50 and 70% of your total plant water would be in front of when the pressure chamber would more steadily indicate true tree water stress. And so a 50 to 70% management allowable depletion or threshold would be somewhat of a pre-threshold, allowing you to anticipate when the pressure chamber levels are going to start changing drastically. In another set of data, this is in Chandler walnut in a Maywood loam soil. This was actually as well from the west side of Tehama County, done in the year around 2002. In this instance, we saw evidence from our soil moisture monitoring of soil water extraction to at least 5 feet deep. And what this experiment showed us is that at about 50 to 60% depletion of our plant available water, these levels tended to correlate well with a plant stress threshold of 3 bars below the fully irrigated baseline. That is 3 bars below the fully irrigated baseline. So again, a management threshold or a management allowable depletion of around 50% of the total plant available water would be a reasonable threshold to help us anticipate when the true stem water potential measurements measured with a pressure chamber would begin to really reach levels of concern. To just wrap up with this final slide, this is from a publication. It's a UCANR publication 8571, written by statewide extension specialist Daniele Zachariah, titled Irrigation Management in a Nutshell. In this publication, this is a separate source from our field research. They also recommend a 50 to 65% maximum allowable depletion or threshold of your total plant available water from a level to correspond with tree water status levels that would be of concern. Thank you for joining me on this tutorial and discussion of using our weekly ET calculations and relating it to tree water status.